Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. My name is Heidi Dunstan, and I am a certified grief educator. I'm just going to pull up my slides real quick and pull these up so you can see everything. And where did they go? One second here. I'm just pulling up my slides. They were there a minute ago, and now they're not. There we go. So thanks so much for taking the time to be here today. My name is Heidi Dunstan, and today I'm going to chat with you about what to say and not to say to somebody who's grieving. All of us have moved through grief in different ways, and so today we're going to chat about the different types of grief that we might experience, but then also talk about some of the ways that, people say things that maybe miss the mark and can hurt somebody who's grieving rather than support them. And I truly believe this isn't done with malice or intent, but really because we haven't been educated on what to say and not say. It's really quite an awkward conversation. So I hope today that you get some tidbits and some learnings of some things to maybe change in what you're saying and some things on how you can maybe do things differently. I am a certified grief educator. I get my certification late last year from David Kessler, and I also come by grief naturally. I lost my husband unexpectedly just over 3 years ago, and I really learned in my process in the last almost 3.5 years, that a lot of people that really do care about me just said things that missed the mark, and they just didn't know what to say. And then I also have friends and family that just said nothing at all, and I found that silence to be extremely deafening. And as I spent time with more and more grievers, I found that our stories were similar. And I truly believe it isn't because we are doing this with intent or malice or trying to hurt somebody. It's because we just don't talk about grief the way that we need to. And so my hope is to change the narrative and to help people to be able to lean into grief, which is what my program is called. So oftentimes I say to people, those moments when you feel uncomfortable and it's time to step away, those are actually the moments when you're supporting somebody that you should be leaning into grief. So one of the things I do love to do in my programs, and today might be a little bit difficult with this program, is I do love to honor people. And so if there's a chat, feel free to put the person's name that you maybe have lost, and we can light a candle in their honor. I believe it's important that we carry on the legacy of those that we've left behind, and that we are able to support those around them. And sometimes the best way to do that is by using their name. So if there is a chat, I'm unable to see it at this moment, but feel free to put a loved person's name in the chat. My husband's name was Mike, and I also grieve the loss of my amazing grandfather, Walter. So Just give you a quick moment if you are doing that to do that. So a couple of things. If you are supporting somebody who's grieving today, we really are going to chat about what to say and not say. But first things first is I really like to talk about what grief is. And a lot of people think that grief is just something that happens when somebody dies. And the reality is grief is a normal response and a natural reaction to a loss of any kind. So many of us move through grief as we went into lockdowns for COVID. Many of us experience grief if we lose a job or a change in relationship, change in health. There's a number of different ways, and these are all really normal responses. If they're important to us, we will grieve it. If that situation is important to us, we will feel that loss. So it isn't an abnormal response. And grief isn't just about death. It could be the end of a relationship. People grieve when they end a friendship. People go through grief when they move through divorce, or they're facing infertility, or moving through an adoption or giving up a child, or they have a miscarriage or a stillborn birth. These can all carry grief, or even a birth with a child with health issues or abnormalities. Lots of times people will grieve the loss of a dream of having a normal or a typical child. Pet loss is a big one that often gets overlooked. Job loss, retirement. These all people lose these, move through grief when they move through these changes in life. If they're moving, even just into another part of the city, if they're losing their community, going through empty nest syndrome, those parents that are watching those kids go off to college or get married, there's grief there. You're used to having 18 to 20 years of those little people that are not so little anymore. Change in health, and that could be as simple as you broke a leg and you're not able to walk the same for a number of weeks or even a number of months or even forever. Being diagnosed with cancer, MS, ALS, those are significant ones. But things like middle-aged people, they grieve when they have to go and get those glasses. And it sounds minor, but it can be pretty impactful for those that it impacts. Change in finances. If you're used to a certain quality of life and all of a sudden your finances change, you can move through that. So you often will see widows and widowers go through the loss of a spouse and then also an extreme loss of change in finances if they don't have things in place. Addiction can cause grief. So an addict will grieve the loss that their life is different, but the family around them will grieve the loss as well. The other one that I wanted to mention with change in health is Alzheimer's or dementia. People will grieve somebody who's no longer there, who's starting to change during that loss, that change. Why is grief so hard to understand? The reality is grief is as individual as our fingerprint. There is no textbook way to move through grief, and we all do it so differently. And so that's why it's really hard, and it's why it looks different. Some people cry, some people don't cry. Some people are angry, some people are quiet, some people just move through the day. And the reality is there's no right way to grieve, which means there's no wrong way to grieve either, because it is as individual as your fingerprint. I always say that the emotional umbrella of grief is one word that describes a lot of emotions. And so I always say it's the crazy train of grief. It's the 10 coupon ride that you can't get off. And so there's a ton of emotions, and it's really can be difficult to pick up that somebody's grieving. Let's move through some of those emotions, and you'll understand why shortly. So some people can be sad, and sad could be quiet, could be lots of tears. It could be loud voices. It could be, just hard conversations and like just emotional that way, like just intense. There could be anger, and that's normal. And grief. There could be anger that they're gone, could be anger at if they're lost by chance, if it was a death by suicide or even by a crime or an accident. There could be anger at God if somebody has a strong sense of faith. There could be anger in a lot of different places. There could be anger at themselves, that they wish they did something different. So anger can be in a lot of different places as well. Guilt. Lots of times people will feel guilty if there's survivor's guilt, or if they feel guilty that maybe they said something that they wish they hadn't said, or maybe the last things that they said weren't kind. There could be a lot of different reasons for guilt. There could be shame, especially if there's a loss by suicide or a loss by addiction or mental health. The stigmas around those can bring a lot of shame, and those can be really hard. Um, there could be gratitude. Some people move through grief with a little bit of gratitude and the fact that they really are grateful that they had the person that they had in their life. There could be anxiety, fear of the unknown, of how, all these emotions that are coming at them. It could be fear of how they're going to make ends meet, or what's life going to look like moving forward, or how they're supposed to do this by themselves without their person. And so anxiety can be a big one. There could be relief. If there's somebody that's been sick, or maybe somebody facing addiction, there could be a bit of a, oh, I'm not sitting on edge anymore, having to worry. There could be fear of the unknown, fear of what they're supposed to look like moving forward, how they're supposed to financially make ends meet, how they're supposed to move through all these emotions, how they're supposed to take care of children, how are they supposed to, there can be a lot of fear on what that looks like. There could be confusion. This just is a half the list right now. And so you can move through all of these emotions in one day sometimes. So it can be really, really confusing. And then on top of that, you add the fact that maybe you're starting to go through the cell phone and starting to see that there's pieces of the story that don't make sense, or there's things that you didn't know about the person. It can be really overwhelming. So there could be shock, especially if the loss is unexpected, or you're starting to find out things that you didn't know about that person. It can be really difficult. There could be frustration. My life wasn't like this before I lost my person, and now I'm frustrated. And now I'm mad that I have to do this. Why am I left with this mess? Numbness is really common. I know widows often say they felt numb for almost a year, sometimes longer. And then they have to start to move through those emotions. And so numbness is really quite common. Some people are hopeful. They get through a lot of that emotion, and after a certain amount of time that works for them, they maybe have some hope that, hey, they're starting to get their feet under them and starting to move forward and maybe to find a new future. There could be resentment, kind of that same as frustration, or the anger, the guilt. There's a loneliness. When you lose your person, that can be extremely hard and really lonely, especially if it's a spouse or a child or somebody that you're really close to, like a sibling or a best friend. That can be really hard, or a parent. The loneliness can be deafening, especially, like I said earlier, sometimes the people just don't know what to say around you, so they say nothing at all, and so you do feel really alone. There could be envy, like, why can't I be there with you? Why couldn't I have been taken? Why couldn't I go first? Why I want to be there with you. There could be regret. Again, I wish I did things different. I wish we didn't have that conversation. I wish those weren't my last words to you. I wish that we didn't do that treatment. I wish that, I had kept my job, and, that things were normal. Whatever the regret is, it could be significant. And there could be hopelessness, like, is this ever going to end? Grief can take a long time. There is no timeline. And so it can feel quite daunting. So as you can see, there's a number of emotions that are under the umbrella term of grief. Grief is, people say, oh, I'm grieving, and it looks really different than what you maybe think. And then all of a sudden, if you can think about all these different emotions, the reality is somebody could just be in a really different space than what you currently think they could be at. What grief can look like could mean that somebody's struggling to do anything. Having a shower, getting out of bed could be a real struggle moving through the day-to-day. Could be that somebody is over busy, needing to stay busy, not allowing themselves to get into their head and be emotional. You could see emotional emotions, somebody just randomly crying. Oftentimes you might see it at the grocery store or somewhere maybe that there's significance, or it could just be that, they had that thought of their person and the emotions just come. Brain fog is really common. and being forgetful is really common. And so it isn't that the griever that's in front of you is trying to be malicious or doesn't care. It's just really that grief can be very consuming. It's kind of like a virus in your computer. It just can take over, and it goes into places and spaces that you didn't think it was going to go. And so all of a sudden, remembering things that were really easy to remember can be very difficult. Grievers often talk about losing track of time. They sit down to go and do something, pay the bills, and all of a sudden 3 hours pass and they have no idea what happened in that 3 hours. They can feel extremely distracted and not sure what's going on. Some people could be actually really hyper-focused and just moving through. I got to write the 600 thank you cards for everybody who attended the funeral. Or I need to, donate all these flowers, or, get meals in the freezer, or organize this or do that. The one common theme that a lot of grievers talk about is the fact that they're exhausted. One, because they're either sleeping, not able to sleep well or sleep at all. But two, because grief actually is more than just an emotional process. It is a physiological response as well. And your body does respond by needing more rest. It can also look like the person doesn't want to talk about their person if they've lost somebody. Somebody could be craving to hear their person's name and hearing stories. Both are okay. Doesn't really matter. I know when I lost my husband, I had a photo of him on my phone, and I saw a friend, and she was like, I don't know how you look at that picture every day. And I said, well, I saw my husband every day. And now I still want to see him, and this is the best way I can do it. She's like, I don't know that I could do that. And I said, that's okay for you. And this is okay for me. Some grievers really crave wanting to hear their person's voice or feel their presence. Some just are moving through the motions. A lot of grievers will say that they feel almost like a zombie, just going through the motions of their day-to-day, and then just kind of, when there's time to rest, they just kind of crash and are numb or just exhausted. There could be a mixture of emotions, like we said earlier, that whole umbrella. They could move through all of them in the course of a day or over the course of a few days, and it can be really tiresome and hard to process because those are hard emotions to move through that quickly. Some ways to care for yourself while grieving: talk about your grief with people you trust. Make sure that they're people that you trust, that are in your inner circle, that you know that will honor you and do it with not a lot of judgment. You may want to find some ways to honor your person, and if that means, wearing a ring or carrying something of theirs that's of importance or doing something in their honor, find those ways to find that meaning. It can be really important. Give yourself the grace with emotions. I was somebody who wanted to schedule everything, and my calendar dictates my life. Well, grief doesn't schedule anything in my calendar. It hit me when I least expected it, and that can be really difficult to face. And so when those emotions come and hit you when you least expect it, be graceful with yourself. Give yourself that time and that energy, and know that you need to move through them. Set boundaries. Some people may want to step into your life and say, hey, let's do this, and let's do this, and let's do this. Do what you need to do. Do what feels right for you. So set those boundaries and set them for yourself as well, so that you've got those days where you can be graceful with yourself, but that you're also still able to function however that looks for you. Ask for what you want. So if it's getting too hard to drive all the kids to school or get to all the activities, ask colleagues or people in your community if they can help with rides. Ask, hey, you know what? I'm struggling to eat. Eating by myself is really hard. I'd love for somebody to come, if I could join somebody for a meal, or if somebody would like to come over for a meal. It would bring me some joy in having some company. A lot of grievers find that it helps to connect with other grievers, especially grievers who are going through the same loss. So the world of social media is great. Facebook has lots of groups for grievers, depending on the type of loss. Clubhouse does as well. Connect with those people, and it'll help sometimes to feel like that you're moving through things in a normal way. Sometimes it helps for some to go through old photos and videos. If they're craving to hear their person's voice or see their smile, go through those photos if it brings you comfort. And if there's music that brings comfort to you, listen to it. Some people find music difficult, and that's okay too. Know that you've got to do what's right for you and find ways to honor yourself, because this is a place and space where you're wanting to be graceful with yourself. Some other ways: connect and reach out and get counseling or coaching. And I specifically reach out to a grief counselor or a grief coach, um, whatever that looks like for you. But finding somebody with that specific skill set is helpful. Grief isn't often well taught at a generic level, so find people who are trained specifically in that. And know that not every grief counselor or grief coach is for you. And if they don't resonate, find a different one. It can really help when you can find somebody who can put you in a safe place to allow you to move through some of those emotions in a healthy way. If forgetfulness or brain fog is a big part of your life while moving through grief, create a to-do list, and even use your calendar. Oftentimes, if I was talking to somebody on the phone and we set a plan, I would say to them, can you please text me the plan we just made? Because I'm certain by the time that we're done this phone call, I won't remember and it won't make it in my calendar. And it's not that it's not important, but I really have a hard time when I forget things. And they were super great. They would text me, I would make a plan and look at my phone, get it in my calendar. Because for me, I found that when I forgot something, it really reminded me that I wasn't the same as who I was before. And it really made me kind of move into that grief space a little deeper. Release the self-judgment and the perfectionism. Grief is messy, and there is no perfect way to do grief. And so release that judgment on if you're doing it right or wrong, or if you're crying too much or not crying enough, or you're not able to have a shower every day. Release the judgment. You don't have to hold on to that. Grief is hard enough. Don't add more to it. So stop shooting on yourself. I should have done this. I should be able to do this by now. It's been a year. I should be fine. The shoulds are not going to help you, so just let them go. Do allow for some quiet time and rest, a little bit more than normal. Grief does take you offline in certain ways, and so give yourself that time. Don't push yourself to the point that you're not going to be able to move through those emotions. Again, asking for help. It really does make a difference. And when those people are around you that are close to you, often they do want to help you and they don't know how. So ask, and I'm sure that people will reach out and say, yeah, I can step in and lean in and help with that. Grievers are really good at saying, I don't need help. When somebody offers, can I bring you a meal, or can I help rake the leaves? Can I do this? Accept the help if it's offered. Know that these people this is their way of trying to find a way to care for you. And so accept the help if you're able to. And again, spending time with people who are going through the same situation, it really does help to bring the normal, to realize that you're not moving through these places and spaces by yourself. Judgment and grief. Hard part with grief is that, one, we judge ourselves when we're grieving, but we also judge others. And I believe judgment is grief's kryptonite. I believe that when we move into that judgment space and compare and should on ourselves and say that we should be better than this, or somebody's crying too much, this is grief's kryptonite, and it really does no good. So release your self-judgment. And if you're with somebody who is grieving, don't judge. So if they're crying too much, thank them and honor them for their tears and being open with you. Just because their grief looks different than yours doesn't mean it isn't valid. So allowing those places and spaces where people can feel like they are heard and seen will really help them to feel like you're connecting with them. So back to the meat of the matter, what to say and not to say to somebody who's grieving. This is kind of the goods, and so I hope that you've got some notes already, but I'm really hoping that you can get some good tidbits here. First of all, grief deserves and needs to be witnessed. The hard part is a lot of us were able to witness grief in our culture up until about the funeral or maybe a week after. And then after that, the world keeps spinning and we keep moving on. And the people who have lost somebody, whether it be a relationship or by death or whatever they are grieving, feel like nobody sees them. And so honor that, honor the fact that they are still moving through emotions. The reality is when there's deep grief, it's because there is deep love. It wouldn't hurt if there wasn't deep love. And that is something that helps me to see when I see somebody that's hurting, I see that they loved very, very deeply. And I think that's pretty spectacular. So it isn't, I'm comfortable with the fact that they're hurting deeply. It's because they loved deeply. And the reality is grievers are often asked to lie every single day. In fact, most of us are asked to lie when we ask, how are you? Because the answer we're supposed to say is we're good, fine, or okay. And a griever's none of those. And so I encourage people to ask, how's today? Grief leaves you living in the moment. And the reality is that it is very difficult for people to see that. And so when you say how's today, it can be easier for a griever to say, I haven't slept in a few days, or I'm struggling to eat, or I really just miss my person, or I'm lonely. And they can be really honest with you, and you can actually see where they're at. And you can maybe even offer a solution like, hey, I'd love to go for coffee with you if you're lonely, or can I bring a meal over and maybe we can eat together, or would you like to come over? There's ways that you can then lean in because they're open with you and they're sharing. Some things to say to a griever: using their person's name. Lots of times people crave that. They just feel like, hey, nobody even talks about them anymore. Listen to the words that the griever says. So if they say somebody died, or that they're experiencing a loss, or that the person passed away, use those words. If you say to somebody who said passed away, oh, when did they die? It will feel like nails on a chalkboard. It's not their word, and it can be really hard to hear. So be gentle with them and just really cognizant of the words that they say and use those words. I always ask if there's anything you can do to support them. Oftentimes grievers hear, call me if you need me. I'm here, call anytime. But they don't really know what they need. So sometimes asking, is there anything I can do to support you right now? And if there is something that they know, then that you're opening that door, and be aware of that. I also acknowledge if somebody's emotional in front of me, I say, I see how much you're hurting. I don't have the words to help you, but I want to be with you. So sometimes if you have no idea what to say, just acknowledging you don't have words can really help. It can really change that silence piece and say, hey, I see you're hurting and I don't know what to say, but I don't want you to be alone. And that can make such a big difference. I always say when somebody's passed, reach out, put in your calendar the holidays, when their person's birthday was, or when the anniversary of the death is. Put those in your calendar as a yearly reminder and reach out on those days, and even anniversaries. Those are days that years later, grievers are still moving through them, and they can be really hard. And so all of a sudden, a year or 2, 3 years later, when you say, hey, I'm reaching out and sending you a hug on John's birthday, I want you to know I'm thinking about you, can really make them feel like, hey, you see me, you still know, and know that John's a big part of my memory, and thank you. And so they can feel like they're witnessed and seen, and it's something that takes very, very little effort. Some things to do. Early on in the loss, people tend to show up in North American culture with droves of food. So instead, you could maybe ask if you could set up mealtrain.com. It's a website where you could set up a profile, create a link, and then people can sign up for meals. So you can work with the family that's going through a loss and say, how many people do you expect at your house? Do you have any dietary restrictions? And then people can sign up. You can send the link out to them as well as on social media. And then people sign up and they're able to put in what they're going to make that day when they're bringing food, so that the family doesn't end up with 17 lasagnas or 15 casseroles. They could have tacos and, chicken and salads, things like that. And if you're not in the area, you might be able to then send like an Uber Eats card or a DoorDash or Skip the Dishes. Meal Train also allows, if you pay $10, Meal Train is free, but if you pay for $10, it'll also allow to set up chores if there's things to be done, or organize rides, or even visitation. So if there's like young children, or maybe if there was an accident and people in multiple hospitals, there's some great ways to be able to support and keep people organized, which is great because lots of times somebody has multiple groups of people, like maybe with their church and then work and then something social. So then all of a sudden this one link could create a network of support in one place so that it's all organized and easy. Lots of times I'll ask, if I know the person that's passed, I'll ask, is it okay if I share a story about your person, or would you like to share one with me? Depending on how well I know the person. And so I always ask first, because sometimes if they're heading off somewhere, they're in a rush, I don't want to put them into an emotional state. But lots of times when they do, and I say, would you like to share a story with me? I see their eyes light up, and they may cry, they may have tears, but it's really because it's love. And so I really love to be able to give them the space to be able to honor their person, or let them hear a story that I'm honoring them. Offer specific support. When somebody says, hey, I got it, I don't need anything, say, hey, I'm going to the grocery store. Can I pick up groceries? Or, the neighbors and I are going to be around. Is there any way, we could pop by and rake the leaves or shovel the snow or mow the lawn? Offer that specific help. It can really make a difference, because sometimes a griever doesn't even know. I lived in a condo complex, and so we had a communal garbage can. And, I had lots of family and friends come and stay with me the first probably month after my husband passed. And, my neighbor just said, please just have everybody leave the garbage on the doorstep. And when we walk by, we'll pick it up, so you don't have to teach people where the garbage can is. And I didn't even think about it. But yeah, I had multiple people staying all the time, and they wouldn't have known where the garbage was. And I would have had to try to explain it and give them the code or get them the key. And so, those little things, as much as it seems really little, put the garbage on the doorstep, it can make such a big difference. And be honest. If you don't know what to say that. I don't have words, but I'd like to be with you. You're important to me. I don't want you to be alone if you don't want to be alone. And it was nice for me. Sometimes I'd just go lay down and have a nap. I'd say, hey, I'm really tired, but it's nice knowing that somebody's here when I wake up. And so they would just stay and watch TV or do things around the house. And, I didn't sleep for long. So it was just nice having somebody there. And so offer. It may seem like, life is busy, but it's okay. Just slow it down and just be there for your person. Some things to say and not say. And so hopefully, you can take some notes here and maybe omit some things that maybe you've said in the past, or go, oh, that I didn't mean it that way. And I can see that there's a different way to do things. I never ask how a person's died. The cause of death doesn't really matter. And the day somebody dies is a traumatic day. Doesn't matter if they were there. The day that they've lost that person is like the day that you probably experienced 9/11. They remember exactly where they were, what they were wearing, what they ate, and it's etched in their being. And so when all of a sudden somebody asks, it can take them back to that day. And if they were part of that loss, whether they had to do CPR, whether they were there in the car accident, whether or not they found somebody who maybe died by suicide, it can be quite traumatic. And so I never ask. And it's crazy. I have strangers that ask, how did they die? That's not really information that supports your griever. It's your curiosity. And so be there for your person, not for the person right in front of you, not for the person that has passed. I did have a situation where my husband was a fireman, and he was retired, and he died just after Christmas, and somebody saw him the week before. And about 9 months later, I was at a dinner where they were honoring him as a fireman, and I was sitting at a table who saw my husband a week before he died. And my husband died unexpectedly. He had had a heart attack. And so the gentleman said to me, he said, I saw Mike just the week before, and he was happy and healthy and telling me how much he loved you. And then all of a sudden I got an email like a week later that he was gone. He's like, may I ask what happened? He didn't expect me to answer, But because I knew his situation and I knew that he saw my husband, the answer was going to help him because it didn't make sense to him. And so when I shared, because I was comfortable sharing, it gave him some peace. So sometimes if you feel that you need to know what happened because you just saw the person, maybe just changing your word to say, may I ask, instead of what happened or what was the cause of death, which can be quite blunt. Any sentence that starts with at least they're not suffering anymore, at least you can have more children, at least you're young and you can find love again. At least you minimizes the person right in front of you. It minimizes the loss that they're feeling. That loss is so significant. And so just omit any kind of platitude to try to find a solution or a silver lining, because at least it doesn't work. It just doesn't work in grief, and it really makes most grievers feel quite uncomfortable. Time will heal. Time doesn't heal grief. It changes grief, but it doesn't heal. In my belief, grief is love, and I will love and grieve my husband until the last breath I take. And some days I can love him in a beautiful way, and some days it's messy and hard. And so time doesn't heal that. It changes it. So those words oftentimes can feel quite irritating for many grievers. Don't say, I know how you feel. I don't even say that to other widows because I don't. I don't know their relationship with their spouse. I don't know who they were together. I don't know how they feel. So even when you've had that same loss, you can say it can feel like you're minimizing or trying to compare. And so just avoid those kind of words can helpful. I'm sorry for your loss. This one is a common statement, and a lot of people, some people push back on this one, but when you think about it from a 5 or 6 year old standpoint, I'm sorry that you've lost your mother. I'm sorry for your loss. Well, from a 5 year old's perspective, they're thinking, well, did you cause grandma or their mom to die? And they didn't. And so the words don't totally make sense. It's become a cultural norm for us to say it. But I often will say, losing a parent is a significant loss. And my heart goes out to you. I want to acknowledge the fact that they're moving through something significant, that they're hurting. And I'm not sorry that that they've lost somebody. I'm sorry that they're hurting. So I want to acknowledge the pain. I want to acknowledge that I see them. I see that this is hard. And honor them that way. Oftentimes, if it's on social media, I'll say, losing your best friend or losing a pet is a significant loss. Animals have an amazing ability to wrap themselves around our hearts in ways that we never expect. And my heart goes out to you. For somebody who maybe I didn't know as well, I might say, losing that type of loss is a significant loss. My heart goes out to you. I'm lighting a candle in the honor of your person. And I do. I light a candle and think of them and their person. Don't stay silent. The reality is the silence can be extremely deafening in grief for grievers. And so be gentle, be honest, and just say, I don't know what to say. Just be real and say, like, this is hard, but I want to navigate it with you the best I can. And if I say something that misses the mark, please tell me. Please know it wasn't meant with ill intent, that I'm, that this is, I want to be with you and it's uncomfortable. So sometimes I just will be here listening. A lot of grievers get this all the time. When they start to shed tears, they get told, don't cry, please don't be sad, you'll make me cry. And the reality is if somebody's going to share their tears with me, I'm grateful. And I thank them for honoring me with that openness. And I know that means that they've trusted me, or that they just needed to at that moment and I was there. And so thank them and honor them instead of making them feel bad for trying to be emotional and being real. There is no timeline on grief, and grievers get this all the time. Oh, you should be over it by now. I had a friend just a few weeks ago, her spouse died, and she was at work, and the spouse has only been gone 5 weeks. And a colleague was like, how are you? She's like, I'm really struggling. And she's like, oh, what's going on? She's like, my husband died. And she's like, oh, wasn't that like over a month ago? Aren't you over it by now? No, I'm not over it right now. And so Grief can hit any time. I have another friend who her husband died 12 years ago, and her birthday was recent. But this birthday meant that she was actually turning older than her husband when he died. And that didn't make sense to her. That was a hard one. So even 12 years later, her birthday was a hard day. And so she's not over it. It didn't heal. Time didn't heal those wounds. And so just say, I see that it hurts. I see that it's hurting today. And people can be fine for a long time, and those days just hit, and they need to hit, and allow them to be where they need to be and how they need to be in those spaces. Grievers get this told, you're so strong. I can tell you nobody went to the gym to lose their person, and they don't feel strong right now. So I often change the words to say, I see how courageous you are. I see how hard it is for you to get through the door and move through the motions of life. I see that you're hurting. Thank you for being brave. They're not strong. They don't feel strong. And so acknowledge their courage, because it takes a lot to armor up and head out into the world when you're grieving. Some other things, everything happens for a reason. It doesn't make sense for somebody who's grieving. They've lost something that's important to them, and they don't want to find the reason. They want to have their person back. And so that one hurts. Don't compare grief. I find oftentimes a lot of people have never been able to move through grief in a healthy way either. So all of a sudden, I heard a lot of grief stories after Mike died. Oh, I understand grief. My grandma died. Oh, I get grief. I went through divorce. And all of a sudden, people are like, hey, somebody's grieving. Let me talk about my grief story. Well, if somebody's in those early days and weeks of grief, it can be extremely difficult. So know that, just be there for the person. Let them be the emotional one. Let them move through, guide the conversation. I have a number of friends with faith that have very strong faith, and I never say they're good with God now or God called them home. Losing somebody important to them can rock somebody's faith, and it isn't until they discuss their faith that I will have a conversation with them. I allow them to be where they need to be, because, the reality is they could be really angry with God right now, and they're allowed to be. They need to move through that at their pace. It isn't for me to dictate or to judge. If somebody's been sick, at least they're not suffering now. The reality is, one, it's one of those at least statements, and two, the person standing right in front of you is suffering. And so until they've said, I don't have to watch my person with ALS suffer anymore, or I'm glad the battle with cancer is done, then it's okay to move there. But it isn't for you to dictate, because the reality is you're there to honor the person right in front of you. It'll get easier. The reality is yes, it does change, but they don't want the future look. They're hurting right now. They want support and love and to be witnessed right now. And so do that. See where they're at and honor that. If they've lost a partner or a spouse, that they'll find love again, or they'll have another child. Well, that's not helpful in this moment. It isn't for you to dictate when they'll find that love. Some people never do, and some people do right away, and some people take a long time. And really, they just want to miss their person right now. Grief can be extremely lonely. When you've lost your person, it doesn't feel the same. Those car rides home when you always phoned your mom or your sibling or your best friend, and now that person's gone, and that time can just feel like you're walking through quicksand with cement shoes on. That's where places and spaces we could lean in. Hey, I know you usually talk to your mom while you're driving home. Is it okay if I give you a call during that time? Hey, I know that, you've been eating alone, that your spouse is gone. Would you like some company, or would you like to come over for a meal? Or even just trying to change the routine a little bit to help them can make such a big difference. I know many grievers years out say, I just loved that my friend showed up with a tea every morning and sat on the couch and made sure I had a bagel and my tea and just let me cry. I remember the day after my spouse died, my neighbor showed up with the really good Costco box of good Kleenex, and just really allowed me to witness the fact that those were going to get well used. And we can do things in a really kind of great way. And looking back now, I still smile and think about it. Grief isn't just about missing their person, the fact that they're gone. They're not just missing their loved one, they're missing all the places and spaces that they were supposed to be. They're having a hard time because the world has kept spinning and their person isn't there anymore. So they're seeing the restaurants that they still wanted to go to together. They're seeing the graduations where that dad was supposed to be there, or that wedding, or that holiday dinner where so-and-so prepped this or did that, or all those traditions and places and spaces. They're seeing the Oreo cookies on the grocery store shelf that don't need to be bought anymore because they're not there to eat them. It can be really hard to still see this world without their person. And that can be extremely lonely. So it's not just about the fact that their person is gone. It's about the fact that they don't have these opportunities that they thought they were going to still have. So some things that you can still do: reach out, call and text. Just even a, hey, I'm thinking about you today, sending a hug can make a big difference. Offering that specific support, like I'm going to get groceries, or hey, I'm driving the kids to school, can I pick your kids up along the way? Know that if you've invited a griever to a meal or to a party and they cancel at the last minute, it's because they're struggling in that moment. And turn around and say, hey, can I come back by later with leftovers, or tomorrow, and we can catch up and see how you're doing? Follow through on the offers that you make. So if you offer to bring something, if you offer to fix something, follow through. Because if all of a sudden you don't, it can make it feel even more lonely. Simply just something as simple as listening, witnessing their emotions without any judgment. Just seeing them and saying, hey, I see you're hurting, and thank you for being open with me. Thank you for sharing in a safe place. And hold that in confidence. The hard part with grief is there's the, oh, you saw so-and-so, how are they doing? Like, really? Are they doing okay? Turn around and say, they're hurting. And it would really help if you reached out and talked to them. Feel free to say, hey, reach out and take Heidi's masterclass. She's happy to teach you some things to say and do if you're feeling uncomfortable. The reality is grief doesn't just happen at home. It isn't with just the people that we love at home. It also happens at the office. And so realize that if somebody's grieving, they're going to be bringing it to the office. And maybe you need to have some real conversations about what do they need to move through that. The forgetfulness of grief. I know there was days that I went to head out to teach at a college, and I was like, oh, I forgot to wear pants today. And so a griever might be walking into the office grateful that they've got pants on, but they really have no idea what else they're supposed to be doing through the day. So be honest with them and have some grace and say, hey, what is it that we can do to best support you here? We want to make sure that you're successful and that we're able to see you where you're at. And having those honest conversations can make a big difference. Realize that grief can't be fixed. You can't bring their person back. But you can witness it. You can hold space for people. You can see them and love them exactly where they're at without any judgment, without going, oh, I wouldn't cry that much, or they never cry. Like, that's weird. Just see them and say, hey, I see they're hurting in their way. So with that, my hope is with my Lean Into Grief program is that we can all grieve with grace. I truly do believe that grief is love, and that love is meant to do in connection and not in isolation. So currently I don't have any programs that I'm running. I am writing a book right now on legacy, on my amazing husband, Mike. And my second book later this year will be Lean Into Grief, what to say and not to say to somebody who's grieving. And my hope is to really change the narrative on grief so that grievers can grieve in a community of not just other grievers. My name's Heidi Dunstan, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.